Today I'm going to be working on the fine details in this flower. So what I'm focusing on is bringing in, number one, the value, using different techniques. I'm going to be using just regular hatching, a little bit of hatching, cross hatching, some stipple. I'll also use my blending stump to do a little bit of blending, but I think it's important at this stage to try not to do a whole lot of blending with the blending stump, because what is happening with some students is they're over blending. Sometimes when you blend too much, you're also unable to erase. So it's a good idea to work on trying to add value using maybe the side of your pencil. Try not to make real hard lines, more or less using your pencil slowly and carefully for adding details. Right outside of that little seed pod right there is where I see the darkest shadows in the flower itself. So instead of really outlining all of those little seed pods, what I'm doing is I'm just going to start by going around that seed pod and getting those little shadows added. I'm using a 4B, which is probably a little too dark for this. I'm going to go in with a little bit lighter. Having a really well-sharpened pencil for this stage is really important, because many of the details that I see in this flower are tiny and they're not really meant to be super dark, super wide, any of those things. So I'm also using my eraser as my drawing tool to go in and try to refine some of those lines that I've made. So what I'm doing as I'm working now is I'm just trying to see the highlights. There's actually a really subtle highlight at the very tip of this petal. And I'm going to point this out to all of you because it's important for you to notice that very subtle detail. I'm going to zoom in so you might be able to see a little bit better. I'm pointing to, I know it's shaking a bit, but right here is a very, very subtle highlight. In your actual image, you'll see it a lot better than what you're seeing in the camera. Those are the kinds of little details that do make a big difference. That could easily be ignored by the majority of my students. My job is to point out these kinds of details so that you start to see them. So let's look at more of an apparent highlight. If you look right here, you can see some of the areas where the light is hitting the petal and creating that nice, pretty pink color. So what I'm looking for right now as I am doing fine detail is not necessarily hard lines. I'm looking at the value, the range of value. So this is one of my darkest areas. And right on the tip of that is a highlight. Yes, it's subtle. Those are the kinds of things that you have to pay attention to in order for your details to emerge and to make it look the way you see it. So in this image, you can see here's some of my darkest darks. Here's another really dark area. And then I have just kind of a range of values showing these little ripples in that beautiful petal. So that's going to be what I'm working on in this demonstration. So now what I'm doing is I'm just, again, still using a 2B. I am making sure that I am pressing as light as I can with my pencil as I'm trying to show these values. And of course, I am shading in the direction that the curve goes for that particular petal. That's helping to reinforce the idea that of what the actual petal looks like, because if I follow the direction of that curve, if you watch again, I'm going over that curve. I'm shading in that direction, as opposed to occasionally I see, I'll see students making hard lines kind of side to side. Well, you already see the direction of the lines going in a nice little curve for that petal. So you want to help reinforce that idea by also shading in that direction. I'm not necessarily going to see the lines of my shading, but it is a good practice to begin doing. Shade in the direction of the curves of your object that you're working on. I've gotten a little too dark right here, so I'm going to go back with my eraser pencil, my fine point eraser, so that I can really just kind of lighten that up a bit. It definitely got a little too heavy there. And then again, I'm working on this little highlight right here. It's so subtle, very, very small area. So I'm going to try to shade around that. Occasionally you see me stand my pencil up like a soldier, and I'm using that nice fine point to bring in, really fine lines. Most of the time I'm shading with the side of my pencil or just pressing really, really lightly to do my hatch marks. All right, now I'm going to be using my eraser pencil to lighten up the areas that got a little too heavy. Sometimes when I'm using an eraser pencil, I end up with kind of blending it. It will it'll work kind of like a blending stump. So you have to actually put some pressure on it. There's a teeny tiny little highlight I missed in here, so I'm just gonna go in and use my eraser to bring that back. This tiny little area that I'm working on right now is next to that really pretty highlight right here. So I did have an outline to that petal. Now I'm making that outline go away. How am I making it go away? I'm shading in the darker area next to it. I may have gotten a little too dark in that spot, but for the most part, that is the biggest trick I have learned as an artist to help me get rid of outlines. It's paying attention to where that shadow is. So that outline that was right here is now disappearing because I've made that shadow that goes right underneath that flower. So, all right, that looks good for today. That completes the demonstration.